Will the United States take military action against Cuba? Well, the United States has increased its spying capabilities in Cuba, from growing its network of covert agents to sending more surveillance flights around the island as it seeks to pressure the current regime to surrender or fall. And that's according to a new report.
Well, over the last few months, the Trump administration has sent more spies to Cuba, a move that could precede a larger military operation. However, any actual plans for such escalation have not been formally made.
Remember, Cuba has been on the brink of crisis since President Donald Trump effectively imposed an oil blockade on the country earlier this year. Without fuel, hospitals are strained for resources, trash has piled up, and residents have been plunged into darkness.
We have some very good plans for Cuba. I think, we have to get rid of the regime was very tough, very nasty. The difference is now they don't have money coming in. They had a lot of money coming in from Venezuela. They don't have any money coming. They had oil coming in. They had money coming in. But we're going to take care of Cuba.
Mr. President, sir.
Shreya, as you heard from the president, the CIA spies are generally either natives of other countries who steal secrets on behalf of the U.S., known as agents, or salaried U.S. intelligence professionals who recruit foreigners to do so, known as officers. The U.S. has for decades engaged in intelligence activities in Cuba, as it does throughout the world.
Absolutely. And the U.S. military operations, remember, are often preceded by increased American intelligence activity. CIA efforts to track the whereabouts of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro reportedly played a critical role this January in the successful American operation to capture him.
Well, Shreya, outgoing Colombian President Gustavo Petro, who visited Havana recently, called for the prevention of U.S. invasion of Cuba, and he has proposed that President Donald Trump engages in talks.
Instead of facing hardships in their own lives today, they should be spearheading a major dialogue. One that, given the geographical proximity of Florida and Cuba, could take place here among all the people of Latin America and the Caribbean, their governments and the governments of North America, to establish agreements that will lead us to build solutions to the common problems facing humanity and the Americas.
Now, with November's midterm elections approaching, both the House and the Senate have the potential to swing in favor of the Democrats. But at the same time, remember, a recent poll indicates that a majority of the Americans object to a military conflict with Cuba. Considering this, the Trump administration may be hesitant to launch an attack prior to the midterms.
Nevertheless, a poll from before the start of the war showed that half of the country opposed a military conflict with Iran. Yet, the Trump administration still decided to attack.
Considering the Trump administration's recent actions, rhetoric towards Cuba, and the feasibility of an attack on the island, it is unlikely that Donald Trump will pursue any military action prior to the November midterm elections.
Warning signs of such an intervention on the horizon will be visible, such as troop movements towards southeastern U.S. domestic bases, additional repositioning of naval assets into the Caribbean, and ramping up public statements against the Cuban regime. Avoiding this military action is possible in the unlikely event that Cuba accedes to all of Trump's demands. But in any event, the future of the Cuban regime is decidedly uncertain. Ivan Briscoe is a senior policy director at International Crisis Group. He's now joining us live on the broadcast from United Kingdom. Mr. Ivan, thank you very much for making time for us and welcome to the broadcast. What do you think will happen in the near future before the midterm elections happen in the United States? Do you think President Donald Trump will go ahead with his plan to invade, and I put that in quotes, Cuba?
Thank you very much for having me on. I think it's difficult to say at this stage, really, whether there is a plan to invade. We just don't know whether the US has got the will to go into Cuba to carry out a strike which may get very bloody and very complicated quite soon. There's no guarantee that they're going to have the same success as they had in Venezuela in January. And there are lots of uncertainties about whether the Cuban regime, which has long resisted the United States, which has fought off previous US attacks, will give in. So, I mean, it will be a huge risk, I think, for Trump to order such a strike before the midterms or after the midterms, for that matter. But what there is no doubt is that the pressure on Cuba is mounting. It has been increasing since Trump came back to power in 2025, and obviously with the sort of quasi-blockade of oil in place since January, the tightening noose of sanctions, the legal indictments against Raul Castro and other figures in the regime. So the threatening words which have come from Trump and other senior officials, I mean, taken together, that represents a huge difficulty for Cuba, where the conditions on the ground, as your report has said, are incredibly difficult. 6 national blackouts since the start of the year.
Ivan, good evening. Shreya here. This is what I was coming to next, that, since there are so many domestic challenges that Cubans are facing at the moment, would the communist regime give in to the kind of pressure that is coming in from the Trump administration? And I also want to bring in Marco Rubio into the picture, because this is the man who's being credited for all this pressure and the push towards, reformation within the Cuban government or of the Cuban government from the United States side.
I mean, that's the preferred option of the United States. They believe that by putting all this pressure on, making the economy of Cuba basically untenable, effectively starving the country of energy, that eventually the government would give in, would make very serious, deep reforms, and would allow the United States to become what it has become in Venezuela, which is to a certain degree the overseer, the sort of dominant power over the country, even if the government continues in Cubans' hands. But Cuba has resisted. I mean, anyone who knows anything about Cuban history since the revolution of 1959 would have predicted that. It's done this over decades. It has made some concessions, it must be said. It has promised to open up parts of its economy. There are negotiations which have been secretly underway between the United States and Cuban representatives. But I think where they're unable to make progress is the question of opening up the political system, Cuba being a single party state under the rule of the Communist Party, and to make those really deep economic reforms, to bring in US investment and to recognize maybe the property rights of those Cubans who had to go into exile after the revolution.
Mr. Ivan, very quickly and lastly, with the blackouts in Cuba, do you think there's any hand from the United States, and what could be the ramifications of that?
Well, I mean, there's clearly a hand in the sense that the United States has imposed pretty much a blockade on oil going to the country. It stopped the supplies coming from Venezuela once it arrested Nicolas Maduro in January, and it threatened any country supplying oil to Cuba with tariffs. So it has effectively deterred oil coming from anywhere else, although some ships very occasionally have got through. So, I mean, that is the core of the measure. Now, you mentioned Rubio. I mean, Rubio is very interesting because Rubio on one side is the son of Cuban parents who went to leave for the United States. He feels very strongly about this. This has been a theme throughout his political career. And in some ways, he's reported to be the person who's driving this at the moment, who's left the Iran issue in the hands of others, but is driving Cuba. At the same time, in some of his public comments, he seems to be a little bit more moderate than others might suggest. So it's uncertain how this might go still.
Mr. Ivan Briscoe, it's good to see you. Thank you very much for all your insights and for talking to Race to Power today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.